Okay, good afternoon, everybody. You know what time it is. It's 3 o'clock. That must be what? Time to talk about the Internet of Things. We are entering the last two panel discussions for today and for the CBIT Global Conferences. So everybody's really excited. We're in the home stretch right now. It's Friday afternoon. We've had a good conference. And these last two topics that we're going to talk about are things that are really hot topics right now, buzzwords, IoT. And let me ask you, even before we bring the panelists up, when I say Internet of Things, is that something that everyone feels that they are thoroughly informed about? Raise your hand. Or do you think you need to know more? Raise your hand if you think you need to know more. Good. Well, then you're in the right place. Let's go then. All right, let's call our panelists up. If y'all can just come up here and take your seats. I've got the Greyhound man here next to me. Yes. Much has been written and much has been said the past 3 days, too, about the Internet of Things. And what's interesting is if I talk to my nieces and nephews, for example, they're 4 and 5 years old, and we talk about the Internet of Things and machines being connected to the Internet, they look at me and they're like, they say, well, of course. They are able to understand it, and for them it's like second nature, whereas for us we need to have a panel discussion and we need to talk about exactly what it means. So we're going to use this panel discussion maybe to kind of catch up with the kids in a way, because they are growing up in a world that when we were children, of course, no one even dreamed would exist. So before we jump into that, I'd like for the panelists just to introduce themselves, let you know who they're with, so that everybody knows everybody. Let's start at the far end.
Hi, I'm Abhishek Latte. I'm the CEO and founder of a startup in the Internet of Things and wearable space. So we design products like a track and find tag and wearable products with a focus on safety and fitness.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rapunjay Parekh. I'm with Siemens. I'm Chief Manager Marketing, currently responsible for the data center vertical, supporting the complete APEC countries for our data center business. Been with Siemens for 20 years and have been actively involved with the power distribution business, the industrial automation business, drives technologies business over the past 20 years. I've been in my previous assignment with Siemens, I was head of sales for India for our power distribution portfolio, and I'm really happy to be as a part of this panel with a lot of knowledgeable people, and I look forward to some nice interactions.
Hi, I'm Shalini Kapoor. I'm from IBM India. I'm Chief Architect Internet of Things at the software labs that we have here in India. We have recently launched an Internet of Things cloud service called IoT Foundation, and that is out of my lab. We are also showing that in our demo booth, so if you get some time, do drop in at the IBM booth on Internet of Things. I look forward to a lot of good interactions with each one of you.
Okay, I'm Nagraj Dikshit. I manage the wireless connectivity group in Texas Instruments, India. Basically, we provide for all this Internet of Things the basic connectivity, the wireless connectivity, which is over some 14 standards. We'll probably talk more about it in the due course of this discussion. So one of the things is so the product which we had done, what we call it as the SimpleLink Wi-Fi, was judged about a couple of months back as the most innovative product in the Zeno conference. I'm looking forward to have an interesting discussion which we started at lunch table and it's not ended yet. Okay, thank you.
Good.
I am Sanchit Gogia. I'm the Chief Analyst and Group CEO for Greyhound Research. We're an analyst firm focused on emerging markets. Our job is pretty simple, to demystify technologies and put the nuts and bolts together and say what's working, what's not. So we'll find out how real is IoT and where it can be used.
And this is what? Is this our second panel together? Or third? Okay, all right. He's going to get the badge for most participation this week. He's been a good sport. Let's start off by talking about the technology that's involved. The Internet of Things basically means what? Connecting machines, manufacturing, and the Internet, getting rid of basically a wall between the two. How are we to understand that where are we technologically right now? We were talking earlier about that maybe that's the best way to enter this conversation. What would you say? Let's talk a little bit about the technology.
I think when you talk about Internet of Things, it starts with, you can call it as a sensor or the node, which is important to collect the data. And then taking the data and sending it through appropriate gateway to the Internet is the next thing. Then taking that data and coming up with smart way to analyze it or call it on the cloud, data management, worrying about the security of the device, the information, then talking about some kind of a business model where you would go talk about how are you coming up with ways to run that business. That is another thing which will come up. And of course there comes in standards and other vectors which government plays a role and the international bodies plays a rules. So coming from place where we call as products, which is the node products, the sensor products, the few things which is important when we talk about making the products for the node is like, I would call it as three things. One is like, how do you make it energy efficient? Like your current phone, like Wi-Fi, you charge it every day. How do you make it enabled to last on 2 AA battery for more than 2 years, something like that? That is one thing, energy efficient. Because you don't need to be worrying about line power in all the cases, or you may not have line power in all the cases. Second thing is like, making sure you're having adequate hardware, software, security protocols so that you're taking care of both IP tampering as well as the data security. And the third comes to how do you make it easy? Because if you're talking about connecting, people talk 20 billion, 30 billion, 40 billion things. You need to make it easy for people to use. So those are three vectors I would call it from a node perspective. I think others can comment from a cloud and other vectors.
Shalini, what would you say? I mean, give us some insight from inside the lab at IBM.
Yeah, I think Nagaraj covered the entire stack because the IoT stack starts at the sensor, at the device. But it's basically how you instrument the device. Then how do you interconnect with various things? How do you connect them together? And the idea is that and the problems which are there in this space is that the complexity comes when there are events being generated every second. So there are millions of events that you have to handle. For example, a car is moving on the road and there are GPS location being sent and you want it to be monitored on per second basis. And there are 20,000 cars out in the market or out on the roads doing this activity. So imagine the number of events, and each event, suppose even if it's 4 KB of data, but there is huge amount of data and events which are getting generated. And there is that amount of scalability required at the back end to take those events and then process those events. So the scalability of, it's a totally event processing complexity that I'm talking about here. And once you have taken the events, then you have to manage it and give it to the right handle. Like, the use cases we talk about are very simple. There are water sensors all across the city. There are traffic sensors. There are street light sensors, parking sensors. But for a smart city, if every sensor is sending 4 KB of data and there are lakhs and lakhs of these sensors, then how do you handle the huge data traffic? So those are some of the things which are answered by going into a cloud platform and taking very high bandwidth messaging engines which can, do it. And actually softwares cannot do it. You need virtual appliances, gateways to be able to cater to these capabilities. The other thing is when all the data comes in, are you able to process it and analyze and give the response back to the device? So if a car is going on the road, you have to see the speed at which it is going and the elevation of the road. You'll get these two sensor readings, but then you analyze and you tell back the driver on his dashboard, please slow down, otherwise you will be wasting more fuel. So there is some processing which has happened in real time, has come back and has given a command. So the whole process becomes complicated, and it is solved normally by moving to cloud platform and moving to high process engines, which can be there at the back end.
A nice perspective, and maybe from an industrial perspective, okay, there are various terminologies for this. Some call it Internet of Things, some call it Web of Things. That's what Siemens calls it. But imagine you have billions of devices. These devices are standalone. Now, if these devices can be connected to do a common function, and the common function could be either device A is able to tell to device B what you are supposed to do. Let's take an example of a car. If, like, say, there's a vehicle which is moving in a particular direction with a particular speed, and there are some issues, okay, the vehicle can compute itself locally and then tell the driver do something. Now imagine the next situation wherein all this information is connected to an internet. And intelligently, this is able to actually tell the driver in the car behind him that, look, something is wrong, this fellow is braking, please take care. That's the next level of intelligence, which we are talking of device communicating to device, or a machine-to-machine communication. And this is where the Internet of Things plays an important role, because the machines are able to be connected to the internet or to the web, and they are able to connect to each other. And then naturally this data requires to be stored somewhere. Either it could be locally within the machine, and only the critical data which needs processing goes to the cloud, or maybe say to the servers, or the entire data can move there, where somewhere at the back end there's an application which strongly analyzes this and keeps on giving instruction what is required to be done. Possibly to make this successful, the complete ecosystem, which starts from the sensor to the equipments who are going to really use this or transmit and activate this information, to the infrastructure where the data is going to be stored, or maybe also the infrastructure which is really required to secure this data, or maybe say this facilities which is going to store data. So that's an entire ecosystem, what we call as Internet of Things or Web of Things.
Yeah. So from a layman's perspective, I think with the Internet of Things, what's going to happen is we are slowly moving towards Skynet in the Terminator series, where machines take control. So
the Terminator.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, you stole my last question for the panel discussion. Okay.
Yeah.
But we're not headed towards, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back, and all of that, are
Yes,
we?
yes.
Is that where we're headed?
No.
Okay, good. I don't want to scare everybody. It's the last day.
That's just from the layman's perspective. So
Okay.
when you go on connecting machines and giving them intelligence, so that's where we would perhaps be headed. So I think from the Internet of Things perspective, it's not just enough to connect devices or machines to the internet, but I think big data or data analytics on the back end, on the cloud side, is going to be a very important form factor as well. So I think in the Internet of Things ecosystem, you'll have device manufacturers who will be like hardware specialists. You'll have cloud specialists on the back end, data analytics, data engineers, and then you would also have to put it into the end consumer. So like, for example, for our products, we put out all the data in mobile apps on iOS and Android. So putting all these things together is not one person's job. So a lot of interoperability is required, and that's also one of the challenges. Like, since there are so many companies building their own platforms for Internet of Things, so getting devices, platforms to talk to each other is also a challenge, I think, moving forward.
And Sanchit, let me ask you, you do a lot of research into this. Aren't we talking about also the explosion of an entire industry right now, and also an explosion in the creation of jobs? Because we need bridge builders, don't we, to connect manufacturing and connect all this hardware, all of these things to the internet?
I think it's a very good question. I think he made a very good point when the fact that it's not just a one vendor's journey. It's when multiple vendors are coming together, and if you see the most of the innovation actually is coming from the SaaS startups and folks like yourself who are sort of shaking up the bigger boys in the town and sort of doing interesting things. And sometimes it scares me. I've seen one live implementation in India for Internet of Things, and clearly the message I got was IT does not want to own it. IT has enough problems to own of its own. So actually it was the facilities and operations guys who ended up owning the entire sensors. This is a large bank in the country. I don't want to name. But that was a scary part for me, because IT was really pushing it away and saying, look, I don't want to own this because I don't understand it completely. I think one of the fundamental premise in this issue is that, look, IoT is not just really about one technology. It's just not about a sensor. It's not just about data aggregation. It's not just about, let's say, an intelligent piece of software. It's actually a concept which brings in all of this together. And the perspective that we should have on IoT is not very sensor-led or software-led. It's got to be a very process and outcome-led conversation as to there's got to be an exploration exercise between the business and IT as what does the business ultimately want to achieve? What are the data points you're looking to connect? What are the data points you're looking to have in the first place?
Well, is this fear coming from the way we even approach this idea? Because here we're talking about the Internet of Things. And I know when I go to Germany, the Germans have their word for it. They call it Industry 4.0. So they've taken the word internet and they've removed it, and immediately they're replacing it with the word industry. Now, doesn't that make it more tangible and maybe even more intuitive for us when we're talking about where we're headed? I mean...
Yeah, so I think I have spent a lot of time studying Industry 4.0 and because IBM is also a contributor to that. I think that's a beautiful piece of work, and a lot of things are overlapping with what we talk about in IoT. The reason it starts from industries, and actually we were having discussion over lunch where Ripunjay said that, everything is, I'm doing industrial automation since years, and what is new in IoT? And I would say that a lot of things actually started in industry automation a lot of years back, and that the difference is that today we are putting the sensors were there in machines, they were on the floor, on the shop floor. The difference is that today we are talking of sensors in this room, on this chair, on the garbage bin, on the street lights, and that's where the proliferation of data is happening, that's the proliferation of things is happening. So thing is no more sitting in a factory or in an industry. It's out there everywhere, and hence there is more data, hence there are newer protocols, because something might be closer, so you need to have Bluetooth talk to it, or you want BLE to talk to it. So there is a big proliferation of what thing is. The thing has changed. And that's why it's become a different buzzword, and we don't call it Industry 4.0 globally, right? I mean, it's much beyond that, because thing is everywhere.
Yeah. And just to add on this, and as you brought the topic of Industry 4.0, let's look at how really this is useful, or what is where these applications can be used. And a classical example I would like to start with maybe say is the automobile. Way back, possibly a century back, there was a very famous statement by Mr. Henry Ford when they launched their Series T cars, which was actually a mass production at that time, the first vehicle which was a mass production. And he said, the customer can have the car with any color as long as the color is black. And the reason was, it was a mass production, and they could not afford to change the color from black to maybe say a blue color, which someone would have wanted. At that time, possibly the mass production was 10,000 cars in a month, or possibly even lower. Today, we are talking of millions of cars being manufactured in a year, that too in a serial production. And within that, what are the variants we are asking for? Not only color, possibly there are 100 different variants a customer can ask in a car. And just, would you be comfortable when you're paying lakhs of rupees and these variants are being possibly managed in a garage, or maybe say by a technician sitting somewhere next to a dealer? No. And that's where the IoT comes in place, wherein the components today are intelligent, with the sensors are able to really have all the data what a customer is wanting. In the process, these components really tell to the paint shop, hey, for this car, please send a blue color body. And really that's how in the serial production, automatically the sensors or the equipments are telling which component should come in. Benefit, you are able to have a mass production which is flexible to cater to an individual's taste. This is a very high-end industrial example, and I'm sure in the day-to-day life, possibly in your households, in your safety, There are innumerable applications where this can really transform the way either the industry works or maybe the people live. You are able to really achieve the customer satisfaction without really increasing the cost. That's the beauty of this.
I think you can, I don't know, it was discussed in the panel on smart city. One of the things which, where you can see quick, easy adaptability is on we talk about smart grid or basically avoiding waste in the power usage. There was a company which was demoing things wherein, frankly speaking, just having the right light or having the right air conditioning or having the right CO2 level, and that was like by just putting in sensors, you could basically turn the air conditioning temperature higher when it was lunchtime, because like in a office or some environment, the people would go to the cafeteria, so you cool it down in cafeteria instead of everywhere you're wasting energy. Okay, that is one way. That way you would enable a way when somebody invests on this type of sensor or infrastructure, he has some return on it. So that is one example of how you are trying to enable this Internet of Things technology where it is viable and it can self-sustain. That's one thing. And second thing is like in parking lots and all, like you could have like instead of having always the lights on, like you could, depending on the motion sensor, like somebody moving in there, you can then decide to brighten the light or you can dim it down to 80%, or even that is being adapted in some highways wherein you could enable that way you are managing power better. There are similar examples you can get on waterfront or irrigation, like instead of current flood irrigation in India, you can think in terms of like a drip irrigation. So depending on the humidity level, you can decide like, okay, the sensor is smart. It goes, checks the humidity and decides how much water is required. So those are things where you could enable smart ways to make it viable and on the energy as well as on the expenses.
Let me just do a little flash poll here and ask the audience, where would you like to see the first real application? We know the applications are already there, but what's most important to you? Raise your hand, let me know. Having these Internet of Things applications in your car. Okay. What about in your home? What about in your health care? All right, so that's where most people raise their arms. But isn't it interesting we haven't talked about healthcare at all on this? And why do you think that is? I mean, we know that the applications are there, but why do you think that's not the first thing that comes to mind? Are we doing ourselves a disservice by getting excited about smart cities, smart cars, when actually, don't we need to worry about having smart bodies and smart healthcare systems first? Or am I sounding too much like a hippie?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I mean, that would be the first one we need to pick on. Like, I think preventive healthcare is something which is very important. Like, there are applications where you're bringing in some smart sensors which is like you wear it. Like, it may not be the same thing like whatever you wear from I would take from a buddy's company, but there are many other companies which are making these types of sensors. It is more important bringing in some kind of preventive, like wherein you sense like sleep patterns or your heart rate or those things are something which you could diagnose and send information back to the doctor or whatever it is. There are applications where we are catering with our radar products wherein in a sitting position it can sense the heartbeat, whatever it is, and then that information, if it is something abnormal, pulse rate or something, it can automatically go to the healthcare person and then you could take preventive actions. So those are.
Is that technology going to give India the ability to maybe to leapfrog to provide healthcare to these rural areas? You know, I've been here a week and I've been watching the news in the evenings a lot. I have to say, by the way, the news in India always amazes me. The conversations are fantastic. But they've been talking about the scandal of not being able to provide just the basic health care to rural areas. And so I was thinking, isn't the Internet of Things actually the cure, the panacea for this problem? You're all nodding your head.
So I think some of the problems which you are seeing, they are very process is also behind them. Everything cannot be solved by Internet of Things.
What about by Prime Minister Modi?
Yeah, so I would say that yes, I mean, our Prime Minister, in fact, has a very pragmatic view on Internet of Things, and we are seeing first time an IoT draft policy is being made by the Department of IT. It is out in the out there on their website, and there is huge amount of funds that they're talking about, which should go into IoT, because IoT they see as a big billion-dollar industry. But coming back to the healthcare thing, I think yes, in the developing countries, it makes a lot of sense to have patient monitoring systems out there in the rural villages. Like imagine it becomes like we were talking to the Women and Child Care department here in India, and they were saying that they do a lot of funding for women during their pregnancy period, but they're not able to monitor, and they want them to take good diet, good stuff, but they're not able to monitor that how are the BP levels going of the women during the nine months, and how the glucose levels are going down. So there are sensors which are available, which can actually, the woman can walk in and her readings can be taken and sent back to the doctors there in the cities for analysis, or to see that what kind of diet pattern changes need to be done. So these kind of sensors, and there is an interesting demo in the IoT booth at IBM, which my team has made. If you want, you can go that, because it's on remote patient monitoring, and it measures the blood sugar and the BP levels. So the idea is that, in masses, if we apply these sensor technologies and get it for the rural women in developing countries, a lot can be done. But what is missing today is that, one, we don't have as many sensors available, and people don't know how to use it. So that's also
an education.
Yeah, so it's a practical problem, that you have to spread the knowledge of people that yes, this is possible, and then bring it back. A lot can be done if you get the data, but the source of the data is where you need to reach to.
My friend here from Greyhound wants to say something.
I think it's a very classic point of people. And it's not the question of having enough sensors or not. Healthcare in India is a problem of people. There are enough and more devices and imaging machines and X-ray machines, but the people manning those machines are not prepared to be even using those basic. Try and get a CT scan in a small village in the country. It's not possible. So while there are great devices, and my family is full of doctors, and half the doctors are in Canada, they probably use the same devices. But the sophistication in the way in which they use these devices is very different in India compared to other countries across.
So is that the biggest challenge then to IoT in India right now? Is it the people factor, the education factor? Is that the biggest hurdle?
There are four things, which is the people, the process, the technology, and the data. And I have values in all four. People are not prepared and educated. Processes are dated. It's about a decade ago processes. Technology is premature, and guess what? Data. Nobody talks about privacy. We all raised our hands in fancy. We want, what sensors in our homes. But think about all the data that's going back to probably large community vendors, and of course, open for public for their view. Of course, your personal lives.
But isn't that? I mean, the data thing. I hear about the Germans, of course, we all know, are the leaders when it comes to data protection. But isn't that something that comes as the market and as a society matures with this technology, and then you start to demand things such as more data privacy? I mean, aren't you putting basically, the cart before the horse?
We're actually not. If you come to think about it, all of us are Google users, Android users. How many times do we even read a policy when we say, yes, I agree to the terms and conditions of finance?
It's because the policy is about 40 pages long.
That's all right.
All right.
The point is, it's a two-way street. Right? It's a two-way street. My point is that it's like the smart city discussion. Before we make 100 smart cities and 100 smart mistakes, let's make one smart city and 10 just okay mistakes. So my point is, before we put out all our data out in the market for everybody's perspective and view, let's have a test pilot and see what works and what does not. Let's not take flights of fancy and go too far in the future.
All right, that's the voice of reason right there. Okay, it's 3:30. We want to get some questions in. We got some questions. There's one in the back here. Have we got somebody with a microphone? Excellent. All right, we've got a gentleman here in the back. Any others with questions? One over here. Okay, you see, straight back, the gentleman standing up.
Hello everyone. I'm a proponent of technology, but I will take a counter stand in asking a question. Do we really need all smart things? Everything smart, intelligent, smart. Classic example was car. None of the people raised hands in terms of car. But I see a lot of startups. Everyone is collecting data. Car, transportation, engine performance. Whether we need it or we don't need it, no one cares. Same thing with healthcare. Lot of sensors trying to collect some data. But my question is, same thing in car. There is a lot of diagnosis. Like once you do, or there may be some doctors here. They will, say that once we do a regular health checkup, all critical diagnosis can be done through routine, periodic kind of inspection. Same thing with car. You do oil change. You get to know all the performances of engine and what can go wrong. We have all the inspection frequencies, when we need to change the component. Same thing with healthcare. So my question is,
yes,
all the buzz around, do we really need so many smart, because it creates problem, the bandwidth, all the frequencies that are around.
So do we need all this smartness?
You get answers in real time.
You get answers in real time. Well, what's the alternative to not being smart? Please don't say dumb. I mean, what's the alternative?
So I'll just, give one interesting thing. We all, at least I hope there are not too many youngsters here, but at least in our, when I tell my children that, world was much better when there was no phones and there were no things. The answer I get from them is, oh, you have lived a very deprived childhood. That's what they say. So, things are changing and things are getting instrumented. And I'll quote one more example. There's a Reva standing in Hall 3. Very nice example. I was asking, the person who was, it's done by Mahindra's and Vodafone together. One very nice example he gave is, they monitor the car, they scan the car every six hours. So they do the same thing which you're talking about, a health check of the car, they will do every 6 hours. And they find out that, everything is going fine, and most of the time things are going fine. But once there was a lady who got stuck in a ditch, and she could not just communicate to anybody because there was she was not carrying a cell phone or whatever the reasons were. And when the health check was happening, they found out that the elevation of the car is not what it should be, and immediately the call center called her up and said, your car we should help you and we are sending someone. So that was a big thing for her at that time. Reva is a small car. It is not a Mercedes-Benz, which you also see in Hall 3, but it's connected. It's connected for the customer. So the customer service which has been given there is just too good. So these kind of instrumentations, real-time events, they help in a lot of emergency situations, and we should definitely adopt those.
Maybe I'll also give one more perspective, maybe with 3 small examples. Take the first example of a power plant which is maybe say generating 1,000 megawatts of power with a single turbine, which is supposed to run 24 by 7, 365 days. Now imagine if one of the blades just breaks down. And this is going to really shut down the power plant for maybe say half a day, 1 day, 2 days. With the IoT, if let's say you are really able to set the health status of all these critical components to a maybe say central management system or a control system, and this is able to actually predictively tell you, hey, something is wrong there, and it may actually lead to a failure, and then you get the critical time to take corrective actions before the system crashes down. This is one example. Another example, just imagine a windmill which is located in remote places. You have this running maybe around 70, 80 or maybe 100 feet above the ground, where actually it's even difficult for a person to go. In such an application, all the critical parameters, whether it's the blade direction, whether it's the rotor speed, whether it's like the temperature within the winding, these are a lot of technical terms, but there will be hundreds of such parameters which ideally you would like to relay back and actually proactively take corrections. You can actually, if the speed is high, these devices can compute and shut down your windmill there and there itself without a manual intervention. just because it's smart. And the third example now, taking the example of the car itself. You like a car, you want it the way you want because you're spending a lot of money, and you have to wait for, say, just because you want it special, you'll have to wait for, say, 3 months. Would you wait? Maybe you will move to a competitor who's going to offer it in 2 months, or someone is offering it within 1 week. I'll tell you, you will move to that. Just because right now the issue is not cost, the issue is like, say, your comfort, your convenience. And the smart technology basically is collecting all this information to ensure the time to market for the companies in the manufacturing is reduced drastically. A classical case, I would say, is where a real play of Internet of Things comes in place. You want to set up a factory to manufacture a particular product. First, you would want to design it, then you would want to design the product, then you would want to design the factory, and then the processes, and this entire chain would take possibly 1 year. By that time, possibly the technology would have become obsolete also. But now, with these technology smartness, all this thing can be done parallelly, feeding information from product design to how the factory should be designed, and from the factory design to how your entire process, including your vendors, is really how the smart thing is working. And that's what is the future Industry 4.0.
I think whatever smart things we are talking, if it doesn't add value, then you will not sustain that kind of a smart business. Okay. Now I'll give you an example. Like if you have a variable which only does your step count or tells you, after 1 week you know what is your trend. Like you will forget about it because by 1 week the charge has gone for that variable, so you forget about it. Whereas instead, if it turns it into a fault detection for an elderly person in a home, that is useful, okay? Or if it monitors whether they have taken their medication or not, that is very useful. Those are value add. Unless you bring in value add, nothing will sustain.
I make a very dumb point, and don't throw shoes at me. I'm not very good at dodging shoes. But technology is like fashion, right? Every fashion on the India Fashion Week, you don't wear it and move around, right? Technology is like just the same. Use what really works for you as an individual. Wherever doesn't work for me, as an organization, public cloud works for me, right?
Some things are fashionable, and then they go out of fashion.
So
technology
my point is
way, right?
the same way. So don't just pick up everything which is fashionable and just because it's up on the street and you know what, a Burberry is promoting it. That does not mean it works for you.
That's right. I mean, look at Facebook now. I mean, does anyone's children, if you have children under the age of 12, are they on Facebook?
Yes.
Really? Okay, don't answer that question. But most of them are not, right? They're not, right? So we're actually going out of fashion here. All right, this gentleman here was patient. He's got a question.
Thanks. We discussed a lot about the applications of IoT. Now, as regards to implementation is concerned, there are a lot of issues. IPv6 we have to consider for the implementation. I think we didn't discuss about the IPv4 to v6 transformation, which is a major issue in our country, worldwide mostly, but in our country largely. At the same time, about the bandwidth, about the internet pipe, and about the entire infrastructure. So I think these are the major issues for implementation of the IoT. So I just would like to ask that do we have any kind of idea that how we are dealing with such kind of implementation issues?
So, with IoT, there's not a huge amount of data that's being transferred online. So a lot of times the processing is done at the next available device. For example, with our products, we do a lot of processing on our hardware or the smartphone and only limit the amount of data we upload to the web servers. So yes, there will be challenges with the transition to IPv6, but it should not be a huge challenge compared to some other fields might face a bigger challenge than IoT products.
Maybe I'd like to add some more to your challenges. Maybe report says over the next 5 years or 7 years, there will be 26, 30, 50 people are putting their numbers, billions of devices which are going to get connected to the net. And in terms of data, I was reading one report which says 40 zettabytes, and 40 zettabytes is basically 14 to 1 million terabytes. So that amount of data is actually going to move via these connected devices. Just imagine the amount of space you will need to store this data. And that's where you will have to really create an infrastructure, right from a smart device, where actually a lot of entrepreneurs are preparing to create those customized device, number one. Number two, connecting this data and storing it. Naturally, this cannot be done in small millions of hard disks. This has to be created into an infrastructure which we say huge data centers or a cloud technologies which has to be created. And this has to be really of a highest reliability, because if you don't get the data when you need it, you've done it. So naturally, these devices which are either the clouds or the data center facilities have to be highest reliability, really able to take care of any circumstance. And the third and the most important thing which comes in and which opens a big business opportunity is what you do with this data. You'll have to naturally analyze this data, and every individual's requirement is different than the other. So different companies would need different applications, different communities would need different applications, and this creates an opportunity for entrepreneurs to really come up with applications which are going to really benefit you. Just take an example of the Android. There are millions of applications created by different, either individuals or organizations. Similarly, with this data explosion, the individuals really need to know what I need from this data. Companies like Google, IBM really are going to crunch that data in a big way to tell you that look, on this highway, there's a traffic jam 3 kilometers ahead, just because thousands of cars are piling up. So please change your direction. Or maybe a health diagnostic is going to tell you, look, over the last 3 months, we find there's a change in your critical parameters in the body. Please go to a doctor. So what really do you want to with this data? What data you want to store somewhere? This brings in challenge number one of the infrastructure, number two in terms of the security, but most important is, do you really want to send this data? What data you want to send, what you don't. And that's where the fine line is going to be really important.
Anyone else? Jim?
Infrastructure is an issue because there are one of the big universities in India, when you visited, they said it was Wi-Fi connected everywhere. But the data rates, what you would get is less than kilobytes. Okay, so I think, and also when you gave an example of IPv6. Okay, now any of the world standards, let's take Apple HomeKit, it's coming on IPv6. Now it comes up with an opportunity for people in this room who are entrepreneurs to think on how would you take that HomeKit and adapt it to a lower data rate. So that is, I would put it as an opportunity, because it's not like, because the demand will ultimately create the infrastructure growth. It may be slow, but that is an area where there is as Shalini was telling, there's discussion about IoT policy, creating it. But it will take time. It's like Bangalore Road, it will take time to get there. But the point is, like, if you bring in opportunity where you can create smart ways to adapt it and let it be less, worrying about the pipe. I would call the internet as a pipe, make it less congested on the pipe, then it will help. Okay, but you still need to fix the infrastructure issue. It's not going to sustain if you don't fix the infrastructure issue.
Briefly, one last one, IPv6. I think IPv6 is a very, and thank you for bringing it up. I think nobody talks about it, but I think at some stage the equipment manufacturers sometimes are not really ready to even upgrade the firmware. There's a sense of insecurity within the manufacturing base of vendors as well. So I think largely the IPv6 as a protocol has been well accepted. If you look at Google and give a nice example of Apple as well, they're all coming through. But I think it's the device manufacturers, and it's not actually the network switches which are affected. It's a higher level of networking equipment which is affected. And and if you were to just do a firmware upgrade from IPv6, you wouldn't ever be needing a new hardware at all. So I think that embedded systems and the need to change hardware ensures that the manufacturers don't actually allow you to upgrade to IPv6. That in itself is a huge hindrance in the community today.
A couple of questions before we wrap up, because we're running out of time. Would you all say that the current government under Prime Minister Modi, is this really a watershed event in IoT and moving towards a new era in India? I mean, is he putting things into place that this country needs? You're shaking your head. In acceptance, okay. I was like, okay.
A lot of things depend on the implementation. So, like for example, they've been declaring a lot of policies. For example, they declared 10,000 crore funds for startups to fund startups, but that policy hasn't moved since the budget, like 8 months back. So, like we need to see everything being implemented on the ground. It's good that the higher level ministries are thinking about plans, but they need to be properly implemented on the ground.
I think one more thing is the good thing about this plan is they have this for most of this stuff there is a private-public partnership of 50-50%. Until you have your skin in it, if you depend everything on the government, nothing will happen. So once you put your skin, your money, you will drive them. So that is a vector which you have to be thinking. And it is an important thing. It's free money is not there. You have to think about putting your money and then you will drive, you will go, you will lose your sleep over your money and then you'll make it happen.
That's a great lesson. Yeah.
Just one more point I'd like to add. In terms of, there are a lot of initiatives taken by the government of India, including releasing bandwidths which are today blocked by some special critical applications like defense or similarly. So you will find that a series of activities are being done by the government, and if you look at the things which are being done, for example UID, the way we are driving now the banking applications and the number of accounts, this is actually a right direction in terms of how the data is getting generated, and the next step you can see is how these are going to be integrated.
So I think the spirit is definitely there. If you see the IoT policy, they are talking about setting up almost 10 IoT center of excellences. They're talking of setting up an IoT incubation center along with NASSCOM, where a lot of startups can be incubated. They are actually thinking of a model which was like EarnIt. Like a lot of years back, we had the internet hubs being set up in collaboration with academia. They are thinking on those lines and saying that we'll set it up for as IoT Center of Excellences, where several use cases are created, a lot of innovations happen, and they're talking of very interesting use cases like water sensor networks, like garbage disposal, and how do you do waste management. So the spirit is there, and there is a lot of activity happening in the ministries. People are really putting their thought process together. Yes, the implementation will take time, and these things don't happen overnight. So we have to wait and watch and participate.
You're an optimistic. All right. I know we joked at the beginning about the Terminator and this, but is the Internet of Things, is this the logical, the next step to reaching an era in which we have artificial intelligence, or to where our machines with our help develop a conscience? Is that where we're headed? Let's ask the researcher from IBM to give us the final word.
So, as a technologist, I see both things. Both are different concepts. This is all about cognitive computing,
yes,
right? And cognitive computing is very different from instrumenting things and deriving intelligence out of it. Yes, when you instrument, you derive intelligence, and then you do cognitive computing, then you reach what you're talking about, right? The sci-fi movies stuff.
So we're still a long way from that.
No, we are there in some sectors where we are putting the cognitive computing quite high. Like for example, in healthcare, from a doctor's perspective, how do you predict diseases? Those are areas which are very cognitive computing intensive areas. And yes, it is happening there. But what I'm trying to say is that Internet of Things and cognitive computing together give what you're asking, rather than each one of them a competition being.
Very good. Okay, so we'll talk about this next year, and next year somebody can take the microphone and say, "I'll be back." All right. All right. Let's give them a round of applause, everyone. Excellent discussion. Excellent discussion.